I would like to talk to you about a number of things. I originally called you up because Danielle Hartman and Yossi Klein-Halevi, good friends of yours, they did a podcast
I was at the wedding
yesterday.
last night, yes.
Yeah, they did a podcast yesterday on religious Zionism. And, half of it was in Yiddish and Hebrew. I exaggerate, but I don't understand what's going on in your politics. And frankly, it's none of my business. But I want to know if Israel is united in defeating Hamas and then going after Lebanon and Hezbollah if it has to, and Iran if it has to.
Not as united as I'd like us to be. And the unity is fraying at many edges. A certain percentage of Israelis, and I can't put a number on it. Sometimes a poll came out the other day that said 60%, but I don't know if that 60% actually understood what they were being asked. Would you accept the Biden plan in its entirety? The Biden plan, which has been pitched as an Israeli plan, and everyone in the government keeps on denying that in entirety it's an Israeli plan. I shall explain. This is very, very labyrinthine.
Please, we got time. That's why I asked you to come early.
It's a three-phase plan. Okay, first phase would be acceptable to just about every Israeli, including Mr. Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and the government. What is it called? So a 6-week ceasefire in return for a certain number of hostages. The number's been floated around as 33. P.S. The headline right now, you've probably seen it, the U.S. intelligence sources think there may be only 50 hostages left alive.
Yeah, it's in the Wall Street Journal this morning.
For 33 hostages. And a certain number of Israeli prisoners, Palestinian prisoners, terrorist prisoners in Israeli jails who would go free. And I think that would be acceptable. As painful as that would to let these prisoners out, extremely painful. Think about the families of the people these terrorists murdered, and these terrorists are going to go home to a hero's welcome, and the people they murdered are not going home. They're staying in the ground. That's how painful that is, excruciating. Okay, but still, I think Israelis would go for phase one. Phase two is the big phase. Phase three says, in return for the rest of the hostages, if Hamas will actually give us the rest of the hostages, they won't, Israel will withdraw entirely from the Gaza Strip, all of its forces, and there will be a permanent ceasefire, i.e., Mr. Sinwar comes out of his tunnel, he declares victory, and he begins the process of reconquering Gaza and reorganizing and rearming for the next attack. That's basically phase two. Though in phase two, according to the Biden plan, it says there'll be steps taken to ensure that Hamas can't regain control over the Gaza Strip. I'd like to know what those steps would possibly be, because anybody who takes control, any Palestinian who assumes any authority in Gaza Strip who's not Hamas will be assassinated a day later. And that's including people from the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. And the Palestinian Authority can't even rule the West Bank, never mind Gaza. So that's the phase two is the major issue. Now, the poll said that 60% of Israelis would go for this. I don't know if they understand the full extent of it, but I have met some Israelis, not in my family, who say, okay, we'll get them next time. Let's get the hostages out. Let's end this, and let's focus on Hezbollah in the north. Because nobody's saying that we can't take on Hezbollah in the north, because Hezbollah is 10 times the threat of Hamas, and Hezbollah has rendered the entire northern part of the country uninhabitable, set fire to something like the equivalent of 10,000 football fields of agricultural land, and rendered 80,000 people homeless. So that's an untenable situation. I was in Washington the last couple of weeks, Hugh, and I brought in a delegation last week of 9 displaced people from the north, mostly housewives. We went to both houses of Congress, we went to the White House, and they told their story, because in Washington, nobody knows the story about the North. It's not being covered by the U.S. press almost at all. And what I learned from this delegation, was that there's no status quo ante. In the aftermath of October 7th, you cannot tell the people of the border areas of the North to go back and live alongside a fence with Hezbollah on the other side of the fence. That's not going to happen. They won't go back there. And so I think the majority of Israelis understand that situation is thoroughly intolerable, and that something has to be done about it. Gaza is a different story, and there are a certain number of Israelis who think that we should get out of there now and regroup and catch our breath and focus on the bigger threat up north.
Now, Ambassador, as I say, I consume as much English language Israeli media as I can, and what frustrates me is that the war reporting from Gaza is intermittent. Now, Manny Fabian of the Times of Israel did an embed, and his report yesterday was fabulous news, although the cost has been staggering, including 11 IDF soldiers over the weekend in a booby-trapped building, they have figured out the tunnels, and they are methodically pushing Hamas back deeper into the tunnels, and they're killing thousands of them as they go along, but at extraordinary cost. Does the Israeli public have a good grip? I actually argued about this with George W. Bush in the Oval Office with Bill Bennett, that the Iraq War, we had to know how many of the terrorists we were killing, and he didn't want to do the body count because of the Vietnam hangover. But we won the argument. He started to tell they were stacking up jihadists like cordwood, and it sounds like the same thing is happening with the terrorists in Gaza, but we don't get any reporting, and the success on how the technology has evolved to find and fight in the tunnels, there isn't any reporting. Why isn't there any reporting?
It beats me. I had a major reporter from the United States, not unfriendly person, come to sit and do an interview with me yesterday, and he asked the same question. He says, "Why aren't you embedding? We were embedded in Iraq. We were embedded in Afghanistan. Why wouldn't you do that?" And there are tactical reasons that officers don't like having embedding. They don't want anything that's going to distract attention from their soldiers. Get in the way of their soldiers doing their activity. Anything that endangers their soldiers, that's their first responsibility. There is also an argument that I've heard that Israel is loath to show the world the extent of the destruction in Gaza, but people have seen it anyway. And I think it's very crucial. I agree with you. I don't have a good answer other than there has been a chronic lack of appreciation of the way Israel appears in the world. The news we see here is not the news you see there, Hugh. Very different. Our news is about heroism and suffering of Jews and then of Israelis. One of those soldiers killed, the commander, was a Druze, not a Jew. And the external coverage is all about Palestinian suffering. So in order to counter that, you'd have to understand the way Israel is appearing in the foreign press, which very, very few people do.
Now, I do want to compliment Prime Minister Netanyahu for actually taking a swing at the Biden White House, because I don't know what they're doing with weapon deliveries, but I know that the 50 F-15s that Congress approved have not landed in Israel. And I do suspect that there is a left wing within the White House that is really anti-Israel. And it's incoherent to me. You're an ambassador, you're a diplomat. Are we giving you what the Congress said to give you?
I don't know. And I've been interviewed multiple times by the Israeli press on this issue. I'm going on TV, Israeli television, right after this interview, ask the same question. And this is what I say. I said, if you're not in the Prime Minister's office, if you're not in the Oval Office, you don't really know what's happening. You're only getting bits and pieces from the news. What we know is that a month and a half ago, President Biden went on CNN and said he's going to delay shipment of arms to Israel. He just said that. And the degree to which that directive was carried out, according to Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State, it was only done with regard to one shipment of one type of artillery shell. I don't know that. I don't think anybody knows it. I think that, where there's smoke, there's fire. I can't imagine that the Prime Minister was animated only by political considerations in making that statement. There is a news item today that said that both Ron Dermer and Nisaki Anegbi, his two closest advisors, were against him making that statement. So there must have been something very compelling about it to make him do that. But in any case, if there were delays, I think those delays are going to be, removed. Now, the 50 F-15s are supposed to arrive in 2028.
But why have they been? But it takes a long, long runway to get there, and it's been paused.
That's what it says. Okay, let's see if that's true. I don't know. All I know is I had heard, by the way, having gone down to the front several times, from artillery officers. They're running on short supply, and they have been for a long time.
All right, let me turn to one big question. I want to get into some nitty-gritty details. We're going to take a short break, go to commercial for some of our affiliates, and we'll talk during the break and come back, and it'll all be on the podcast. Why has Israel never developed a heavy bomber of its own? By that I mean it can build anything. Built Iron Dome. It's going to get iron laser beam, whatever they're building. They could build a strategic bomber. Why haven't they?
It's the same question again. I've been asking it for years now, for more than a decade. Now, I don't know that we haven't built one. There could be that we have. And I know that in repeated occasions, there were attempts to acquire them from the United States, even lease them from the United States. Those attempts were not successful. And I don't have a good answer for you. The Air Force has a tremendous amount of influence in this country, and the Air Force likes its tactical jet fighters.
Because what we're going to talk about after the break is the Washington Post story that Iran has tripled its uranium enrichment, and they are at breakout. They're about 3 weeks away from a nuke. And every president from the beginning of the crisis with Israel in 1979 said Iran cannot have a nuke. This president, I don't expect you to say this, but my audience is too feeble and too afraid to do anything about that. We had to come to that. Last question for this segment. We have a minute. IDF spokesman says Hamas can't be destroyed, drawing retort from PM. That's war's goal. What is going on there? Why? This is a good spokesman. Why would he say something like that?
A little bit out of context. He said that Hamas as an idea can't be destroyed. And he's right. Hamas as an idea can be destroyed, but its military abilities can be totally downgraded. Its ability to govern Gaza ever again can be completely eliminated. That is true. That is true. So he was taken a little bit out of context. But there is a growing debate / controversy between the government and the army over the day after scenario. The army says, listen, we can't be responsible for 2.5 million Palestinians, many of whom now are destitute and homeless. We can't be responsible for feeding them. We can't be responsible for the medical treatment. We can't be responsible for rebuilding Gaza. We've got to have some type of a day after scenario, which doesn't include Hamas. And my own opinion on this, if we don't have a scenario like that, there's going to be other scenarios, and they're out there, which talk about adding Hamas to the day after governance of Gaza in a technocratic role. I think
they're going to be in charge of the operation of them. Oh, God. All right, I'm going to talk with Dr. Oren during the break. He'll be back after the break. Don't go anywhere, America. Stand by. We're going to cover with Robert O'Brien and Roger Wicker these very issues in Hour 3 today. They matter so much in this election as realignment in America occurs and Friends of Israel move to Donald Trump and away from the weak-kneed Joe Biden administration. Stay tuned. That's me, not Dr. Oren saying that. Dr. Oren, religious Zionism, Yossi and Daniel tried to, they were talking about it like it's 5, 6, 7 different dimensions. I don't understand it. I know when people talk about Christian nationalists, it's overwrought in the United States, front page New York Times today. How big is the Ben Gvir party and his allies and the other? I mean, what kind of political force is it in Israel?
Well, let's define religious Zionism. These are people who are observant Jews, but they believe, their core belief is that the creation of the state of Israel was an act of divine intervention, not retribution, sorry, intervention, and then, interesting Freudian flip, and an act of divine intervention that is a step toward the Messianic age. It's actually a prayer in the service. The Strait of Israel is the beginning of the flowering of our redemption. And that really defines religious Zionism. These are people who go into the army, certainly. Many of them go into the officers' corps. They are heavily represented in the settler movement. They believe in the greater Israel and the biblical promise of the greater Israel. But it would be a mistake to taint all the religious Zionists with Ben Gvir. I mean, I know dozens and dozens of them and who don't vote for Mr. Ben Gvir. Matter of fact, I totally don't know anybody who does. So there's a certain segment of that population that does support Ben Gvir and Smotrich. Larger groups support Ben Gvir than Smotrich, which is going down the polls. And I think in the next election, the Ben Gvir party, Jewish Power, would be getting something in the vicinity of 13 mandates, which is still considerable, but it's not 25 mandates, it's not 30, 40 mandates. And they do have a tremendous sway on policy, and particularly on financial policy in terms of the allocation of resources. And in this government, they have the government in kind of a stranglehold. And they know in the government that certain steps, like accepting phase 2 of the Biden hostage release ceasefire plan, would bring down the government because these two parties.
Well, this part I get, and this is what I don't understand about the Israeli press. You had 5 elections Finally, they got a majority, 64. Then 10-7 happened. Parliamentary democracies are not constitutional republics. But it seems to me nuts to hold elections right now. Absolutely bonkers to have an election campaign right now. What do you think?
I'm against elections right now. I think the elections means we don't have a government for 3 or 4 months at all. No government. Now, many Australians think that no government would be preferable to this government, and my friend Yossi Klein-Levy and Daniel Hartman believe that. They believe that passionately. I think that I have disagreed, and I've continued to disagree.
Right.
But there are ways of changing the government that don't involve elections. That's the thing. You can have shifts of parties. You can have realignments within an existing government where, say, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich could leave, but an opposition party could come in. And you don't have to go to elections.
Ambassador Michael Oren has stuck around a long time today because it's very complicated. Ambassador Robert O'Brien's coming on in hour 3, former national security advisor, old and dear friend of mine, former law partner. I'm going to ask him the same thing. The borders between Iran and Syria and Lebanon are fake. They don't really exist. It's all Iran, in my view. Would a northern front, could it conceivably involve going to Damascus and come and doing an end around Hezbollah while the Israeli Air Force just pounds the living daylights out of Hezbollah? Because Nasrallah threatened you yesterday. I mean, if you're going to go to war, and this is the problem with what W did with Iraq. He stopped at the fake border with Syria, and he shouldn't have. So is there a chance that Israel fights for a decisive victory? Not a for all time victory, but a decisive victory?
I think that Israel would fight, and this is highly, highly speculative, to move Hezbollah back from the border. Again, the residents of the north are not going to go back to the status quo ante of living on the other side of a fence from Hezbollah. Now, knowing what those terrorists can do once they break through that fence, they know that no fence is impenetrable. And I understand them completely. Israel would have to eliminate the Hezbollah force in southern Lebanon. I don't think Israel is going to take on Syria or broader Iran at this point, and eliminate the missile threat. Because we're talking about 150 to 170,000 rockets in Hezbollah's arsenal. The estimated rocket fire per day, estimated by the IDF, is between 1,000 and 6,000 rockets. That will overwhelm any anti-missile systems we have. And we're going to have to eliminate them very, very quickly with ground forces. You can't do it from the air, which means invading southern Lebanon. And the Army has to be prepared for that. It has to have the ammunition to do that. That's going to be a critical issue.
You've done that yourself, haven't you? I mean, I think you might have been in Lebanon yourself, or maybe that's Aviv. And Israel has seemed to be pretty competent in moving at least to the river, and it went to Beirut in 82. Can't they do the same thing again?
I went to Beirut in 82.
Okay.
I claimed to be the first Jeep into Beirut in 1982. Yeah, we did it. We did it very quickly. We did it in about a week. We can do it. Of course we can do it. But I think what we really have to do is clear out. There's 200 Lebanese villages under which Hezbollah has installed these 150, 170,000 rockets. They do it on purpose. They're in houses, and those houses have people in them because they know what the world press is going to do to us. And they're trying to force us to a ceasefire because we're killing too many Lebanese. Same story in the South.
I'm going to play Douglas Murray in the next hour of the debate. He just destroyed Mehdi Hassanian. The world press doesn't represent the world. I mean, I wonder, do Israelis know that half of America, I represent half or more of America that stands shoulder, no daylight between us and Israel, no daylight between the democracies, and that, yeah, we got a left wing and they're nutty. But does Israel actually know that there is a non-religious democratic support for Israel in the United States?
They do, but let's be honest. They're not in power right now, and those are the people they're not calling the shots, as it were, or permitting us to call the shots all the time. And so, again and again, I was just in Washington. I'm back in Israel for a couple of days, and what I was hearing again and again in Washington was don't. And it wasn't don't aimed at Hezbollah in Iran. It was don't aimed at us. And, the United States it fears a regional conflict in which it could be drawn in, certainly being drawn in during an election year, but generally being drawn into an election year, going into a regional conflict. And it's a historic fact, Hugh, that since our second Arab-Israeli war in 1956, the Suez Crisis, and every single war we've had, the United States has said stop. And the 6-day war would have been a 9-day war if the United States hadn't said stop.
Trump is going to say not stop. He's going to say win. Stop. Trump would say win fast.
Is because they don't want to get dragged into a war. Once upon a time, the big fear was dragging into a war with the Soviets. Remember this? But more recently, it's just, particularly after Iraq and Afghanistan, that war weariness in the United States, what they talk about, people don't want to get dragged into another Middle Eastern war. So they say stop. And eventually we're going to have to say to our American allies, irrespective of who's in the White House, we have to say, I'm sorry, this is our vital national interest. And we have to assure that the country is secure.
That's why I liked what Bibi did yesterday. I think the time has come to say, okay, the cavalry's on the way. Republicans are winning. Trump's winning. And we're not going to stop. We're going to win. And that's what Trump tells me on this show. He said, Israel's got to win. But he wants you to win in a hurry. Last minute to you, Dr. Oren. Is that an impossible demand to win in a hurry in Lebanon?
In Lebanon, we have to hit it. It's almost a moot point. We can't win slowly in Lebanon with 6,000 rockets falling on our cities and vital utilities every day. It can't be done. We don't have the luxury of time in Lebanon that, I don't mean this ironically, that we had in Gaza. We have to move very, very swiftly and decisively. And it would be very, very welcome if the United States would support us wholeheartedly in that effort.
I'm pretty sure 75% of America will, and we will see. Dr. Michael Oren, a lot of time today. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Follow him on X at Dr. Michael Oren. The ambassador knows of which he speaks. He explains it better than almost everyone in Israel. There are a couple like Bibi and Haviv who are his equal. But please pass on to Daniil and Yossi. I love them, but they got to slow down a little bit for the Americans who don't speak Hebrew or Yiddish, because a lot of friends of Israel in the United States who are not. It's not because of Christian end times nuttiness. It's because it's a democracy that is our ally and our friend in a dangerous neighborhood around the world. And when the world comes to the blows that it's going to come to, Israel's on our team, not on their team. That's what matters. Thank you, Dr. Oren.